Welcome to Speaking in Spoons with your host, Christina Brookman.
Hi, I'm Christina Brookman, your host with Speaking in Spoons, and this is a very exciting special episode of Speaking in Spoons, Accessibility and Representation in the Arts. We have three wonderful artistic directors with us today. I'm going to go around and let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their theater companies before we get started. Marcy, let's start with you.
Sure. Hi. I'm so glad to be here, Christina. Thank you. My name is Marcy Bermusi. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for Hedgerow Theater, which is based in the Philadelphia suburbs in an arts and crafts community called Rose Valley. We've actually been here for 100 years. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary season this year. I'm new in my journey with Hedgerow. I grew up in the area, but Hedgerow has a really kind of mind-blowing history. It's pretty epic. The playwrights and artists that have come through this organization over 100 years, and that its roots were really in inclusion before that was a buzzword. So this was a place that was supporting intersectional identity and had artists who identified as LGBTQ, BIPOC artists involved, female non-binary folks, and even we're expanding this lens very, very intentionally right now and over the past bunch of years with accessibility and inclusion specific to individuals with disabilities and neurodiverse individuals. So it's a very, very intentional effort, but it speaks to the roots of the organization, which is really exciting to me. So I'm early in my journey here and really grateful for all of the continued learning and to be in such wonderful company today. So thanks.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have you. It's wonderful to see you after all these years and to have you a part of this discussion. And Philip, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us about your theater.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I am Philip Crosby. I'm executive director of Richmond Triangle Players, which is in Richmond, Virginia. It is we can't claim 100 years. Boy, that's impressive. But we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year as the longest continuously operating theater in the Mid-Atlantic devoted to LGBTQ themes and artists and material. Yeah, we've it's always been interesting to me that there are only 15 or so theaters that identify the way we do across the country. And most of them are either 30 years old or 2 years old. There seems to be that dichotomy in where they got birthed because of the history that was going on in the world at the time. But it's been a wonderful journey. I've been involved with them. This is my second decade of being involved with them. So I've been around a long time through many iterations of this place.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Philip. I'm very
Thank you for
excited.
asking.
Oh, absolutely. And Ben, who hails all the way from Colorado.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Ra'anan. I am the artistic director of Family Theater Company here in a very snowy Denver. It was like almost 70 degrees yesterday, and I looked out and it's like snowing. So fantastic.
Oh,
I am here with Family Theater Company. We are the longest running disability affirmative theater company in the United States. All of our actors are professional actors with disabilities. We've been going 34 years. Next season, we're very excited to celebrate our 35th season. I am about 2 to 2.5 years here with Family. So very similar to Marcy. Not so similar to Philip, jumping in, but very, very, very excited to be here. My pronouns are he, him, his.
thank you. And the reason I wanted to have this episode today to raise awareness about accessibility in the arts and representation. There's a lot of conversation of that going on now, but also maybe to talk about not just, I guess, talk about what we think accessibility is and what it could be and the directions that it could be. Because I think when people associate accessibility or associate like with the term of accessibility, it means a very specific thing. So I'd like to kind of go around and just throw out, what is accessibility to you in theater? What does that mean? I know that's a very broad idea. Would anybody like to go first? Marcy,
I'm
I'm gonna
happy
throw
sure, I'm
you to
happy
the
to.
wolves.
Happy to. I think accessibility is really how we make our space available, and it's not a passive action. The idea of saying everyone is welcome, I think theater has always felt that that's what we do, is that we say everyone is welcome, but whether intentionally or unintentionally, we end up excluding by not centering specific needs. And so accessibility to me is meeting people where they are and having a robust understanding of a whole diversity and array of needs. And I think a lot of times accessibility can be thought of for physical accessibility, because the ADA, and I know the wonderful work that was established with that, but for me that really feels like the place to, like, that's a starting place. That's not the finished point. And accessibility to me is an ongoing action. It's a proactive seeking of how can we best be meeting people where they are and making everyone feel that our organizations and our work are meant for them and centering them. So that's how I'm coming across it.
Absolutely. I think um that's exactly, I guess, where I was trying to get with the ADA and the which is extremely important. And it actually does include a lot of things that aren't, like, people associate like the physical barriers to getting into a theater or
Yeah.
out of a theater is accessibility, or maybe things that they would associate, do we have interpreters for like sign language or anything like that? But what are the other things? What are the other barriers that are prohibiting people from being able to enjoy these stories? These are community. These are stories for the community. So how do we share with the community and as a community? So what are
Really,
some of the things that we're doing? Um, would any of you like to share some of the things that you guys have done in the past to help be inclusive or accessible?
yeah, I just want to take a moment and comment on what Marcy
Yeah,
said.
absolutely.
I'm so glad you brought up the ADA in that. We get a lot of places that we're a theater with a pretty solid reputation, and so a lot of places we're also itinerant because we move spaces based on the needs of our performers. If we were to build an accessible space, that would change based on who we have. So we like to try and stay itinerant as much as possible. And we get a lot of places that they say, we're ADA compliant, and they're really proud of that. And the thing is, like, if compliance is all we're going for, like, I am non-murder compliant. I have never murdered a single person in my life. That doesn't necessarily make me the greatest person that's ever lived, just because I've complied with that. So I look for places that are ADA welcoming in terms of that. I think also an issue with the ADA that I feel has always, I don't know how to address it, but the ADA sort of homogenizes disability in a way that, like, it's like, great, if you have a ramp, then you are wheelchair accessible. Well, there are a million different kinds of wheelchairs. There are people that have different kinds of wheelchairs, and I think that's an issue, and something that, to jump into your next question, that families looking to tackle. How do we not just become accessible to a whole group of people, and instead try and become accessible to an individual? Because every person, my autism, which I'm autistic, by the way, probably should have said, my autism looks terribly different than another one of our actors named Philip, who looks terribly different than another one of our actors named Vin. And for us to just put us all in a category and say, well, all people with autism have the same experience doesn't sit right from an accessibility standpoint.
Well, we were just talking about this because we did an episode about a graphic novel called Ripple Effects, where the superhero has an invisible illness. He has diabetes, but there's also articles written by people with invisible disabilities that have been contributed. And the big thing is, like, we talk, and we've talked repeatedly about, there are some like certain experiences are universal, but everybody's experience of their own disability or illness is varied and different. Like one of our hosts has multiple sclerosis. There's tons of people out there with multiple sclerosis. They're all different. Myself and one of my co-hosts, we both have the same form of rare migraine, and we have Ehlers-Danlos, but we experience them differently, just like what you were saying. So it's about, but I wonder, like, can we accommodate, is it possible to, and realistic to accommodate everybody? But like from an audience perspective, like, I want to talk about the actor thing a little bit later. And I'm just throwing this out there. How do we possibly look at accommodating everybody? Because I want us to be able to in the arts. I genuinely don't know how. And I'm talking about myself too, because I use a cane. Some days I use a rollator, and some days I use a wheelchair. So, and some days I don't use anything. It all depends.
I think for us, I try, and this sounds crazy because it sounds what the opposite of everyone says, is we try and be reactive instead of proactive,
Okay.
which is actually very, very helpful. That I think the zeitgeist of our theatrical community has been, oh, we want to do something accessibility wise. We're going to plan 6 months in advance. We're probably going to bring some disability adjacent people in, like a therapist, like a parent, but we're not going to actually talk to the people we're serving. And we're going to create all of these systems that are incredibly rigid for accessibility. So if you need ASL interpretation, you come on this night. If you need sensory friendly, then you're going to come here. And what I'm trying to shift families' mission to is to be as reactive as possible. We have everything that could possibly be needed for every performance.
Okay.
And you, the patron, come up to us and say, here is what I need to be to have an enjoyable time at this show. And I say it in every curtain speech. If there's something we don't have, let us know and we'll bring it. We just had a patron say, it would be great if you had a couple weighted blankets. And I was like, that's a fantastic idea. Went and bought a couple of those. So being as reactive as possible, not so much to a person's disability, but to their needs on that day, is actually what we've found has been able to help us individualize our accessibility towards certain people. Now, mind
you're
you, we're
listening
also
to your community.
Right.
Yeah.
We're also a disability company, so we also put money in. If you request ASL on a day, great. We're gonna have ASL on that day. So we have a sort of accessibility by order system.
Right. Well, that also comes to the question, the barriers in place for theaters to be able to accommodate accessibility, particularly like if their mission is not, like you were talking about, Ben, that's your mission at family. But how, like, I know there's like the overhead of the theater and like all of this stuff that a lot of people don't think about. And I've never been an artistic director, so I don't know all of it, but I hear from my friends. So maybe that would be helpful to talk and just give a word to kind of the financial demands of doing some of this. And are there resources for companies out there if they would like to have more accessibility? Phil, do you want to say, or Philip, sorry.
That's okay. Actually, I was, because we, when you talked about um, accessibility, I think in the most traditional ways that you all are talking about it, live right organically in Ben and Marcy's company, in a way that they haven't traditionally in our company. We've come at it a little bit more the way most theater companies do. So the financial implications are big. Number one, because in our particular market, ASL signing is a fairly expensive thing to bring in. It's like doubling the size of your cast, really, in terms of expense every night. Not that you shouldn't do it, right? But that's a consideration. We're also in a 94 seat theater. So if I place interpreters where they need to be for audiences, then I can also get complaints from other folks saying I spend all my time watching the interpreters instead of watching the shows. So there's that balance, I guess. If you're in a more traditional space, and it's really weird to be an LGBTQ theater and talk about being in a traditional space. On the other hand, for described performances, audio described performances, we have a wonderful organization in town who offers their services for free. The difficulty is, again, placement in a small theater company. Where do you put someone who has to speak during the entire performance and not have them be heard by everybody? Right?
Yeah.
And they have these wonderful they come in with these masks like this, and I feel bad that they're going to die because they can't breathe. And they do a wonderful job, and that's pretty terrific. We have not moved into any sensory performances yet. It's just not a realm that we have felt we had the ability to do yet. There is a bigger theater in town which has done them, and they actually focus on a lot of children's programming. So that's been something that they have done as well. I will talk about just introduce another piece into the conversation, though, that hasn't been mentioned, and it's about safety of performers and audiences. And that's kind of a big thing for us. It's tangential, I guess, in a way, to the questions of differently abled folks, but being a place where trans folks can feel safe coming to a performance and not be attacked, vilified, etc., becomes a big thing for us, and for our performers as well. How do you provide a space where everybody can feel safe? And that's become a bigger issue here in Virginia, as we're getting a lot of pushback to things like this ridiculousness about drag shows and children and all that crap that is being the hogwash, as I like to say, that's being thrust into the conversation. And it's very destructive, and it's very dangerous. And so safety is on my mind a lot too.
And I think, Philip, to that very, very important point, I think that is a crossover and a very important consideration for folks in the disability community too, not in the same potential way where, it feels like overt and active within the LGBTQ community, that there's an intentionality behind that for folks who are perpetuating that kind of harm. But within the disability community, there is all kinds of harm that people have experienced in the community, in public settings, whether or not it was intentional. And yet we as theater producers, we are implicated in that harm when we open our doors and say, no, you're welcome, come on in. We need to know enough about how to support that community, because we're making up for those past harms where they have been looked at and silenced and all kinds of things that could have happened, that we're making up for that. So that's a really important consideration that you're bringing up, because safety can mean a lot of different things. And now, I mean, just that we're in this place of needing to be protecting of our lives as well as protecting of, unspoken harms too. So that's just a really, really important consideration. Christina, you had mentioned the wanting to kind of be all things to all people and open up to everybody. I know early on in my journey with this work, it was starting from scratch. I didn't have a background in inclusive theater practices, and Hedro certainly was not an organization anchored with this intentionality as part of its mission. It happened to be a space that was open and inclusive because that was the way that the artistic director established the place, but it's not in the mission. It's a pretty unspoken thing. I had been with an organization called People's Light, which is a larger theater company than Hedro. It's in Pennsylvania as well, in the Pennsylvania suburbs. And when I was at People's Light, we had this lovely partnership with a school nearby that was an after-school program for individuals with autism, students with autism. And we realized this disconnect. We have this great program. We have supports in place for these students, but we're not really intentionally inviting them into our shows. So we went about a whole wonderful listening tour to learn about relaxed and sensory friendly performances. And that same way that Ben was sharing, the solutions come from within the community. So it's like, who is part of your staff? Who are the stakeholders that are a part of your organization that you are learning from and growing with? But one of the considerations in my learning about autism and sensory friendly sensitivities that folks are hypersensitive and hyposensitive. So you have people seeking the sensory stimulus while we're also saying like, oh, but how do we soften this? How do we so you have people with opposing needs potentially coming to the same show, and that's wonderful in a way that we want to be open in that way. There are a lot of companies that when they approach sensory friendly, they try to soften and take away as much of the sensory stimulus as they possibly can, which can be hugely problematic for the folks seeking that out. So what we do is we navigate an opt-in model. So we let people know, here's what you can expect. This is what's going to happen in the show. There's a pre-performance guide, and we let people know there's this potential sensory stimulus, lighting stimulus. This is how the scene breaks down. This is what's happening, so that people can opt in to that experience rather than saying, we are making choices for you, because we don't want to be making choices for the audience. We want it to be an equitable experience. And so, oh, sorry, Ben, you have things to say.
No.
You're
Ben's
with
applauding.
And I'm like, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you, but if you can dive in.
I do have things to say, but I'm going to let you
Good.
finish first.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. And I do know that we can't always be all things to all people. But I do know that by allowing people the option to choose what is right for them, and how they want to experience it, because we will have, as Ben mentioned, the blankets, we'll have, weighted blankets, we have noise canceling headphones, we have a chill space, we have, various accommodations that can be made. If somebody wants to bring that with them or use that in our space, they're welcome to. However you need to prepare and best enjoy a production, we support and encourage that. I also want to mention that with the opt-in model, there are a lot of organizations that begin with family-friendly programming, because I think there are a lot of caregivers who are looking for offerings for young people who've been recently diagnosed. I'm thinking like specifically with autism and with sensory sensitivities, there are caregivers who are seeking opportunities. But think of any of us, like at whatever ages we are, it's hard to try something new. So if we've not been immersed and exposed to theater at an early age, and you're now in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it's very hard to then say, yeah, let's try this thing that is entirely outside of my lived cultural experience and be a part of that. So I have noticed that for theaters embarking on this work, specifically sensory-friendly relaxed performances, it can start with children's theater, because there seems to be something aligned within that, and you have maybe a more eager audience, or a more an audience that's willing to try something new, perhaps. But it's so important that we're doing this work for all ages, that it isn't just about family friendly, that it has to be work for all ages so that people can opt into it. So we're not making decisions about this work is going to be a little bit too much for you, or a little bit too, whatever, insert adjective. But when I was at People's Light, we did a Carol Churchill play, A Number, which was a very fascinating, complex piece, very, mature in its content. And said, yeah, we're doing relaxed performances. We will have a relaxed performance of this play. We just produced The Pillow Man by Martin McDonagh, which is very violent and dark and has all kinds of challenging content. Said, yes, we are making this space inclusive and accessible to those who want to opt into it. And it was a very, very full performance that people came and wanted to see that particular show. on their own terms as a relaxed space. So I just want to put that out there too. In the opt-in model, it speaks to our production choices and how we might be adjusting or maneuvering within a show, but it also speaks to the content that we make available. So that's just the way in which we've been approaching this has been, I'm hoping for that opt-in model. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, I know you have something to say, Ben. I'm just going to be very, very quick to jump in on the idea of the children and the adult. There are many adults that are finding themselves disabled in any point in their life, including with not just physical disabilities, but also like traumatic brain injuries, or like the type of migraine that my host and I have becomes cognitive, and like so there is those type of sensory friendly and things like that that are not just within certain communities, it's within so many, and it's not just applicable to children. So there are people that used to love to go to theater that are not finding themselves no longer able to go to theater, and desperate. It can be such an isolating existence for many adults with disabilities. So to be able to have those opportunities, I think is so critical, that we find ways to open up and be inclusive, not just in that physical capacity, but in all of those capacities that you were mentioning. And I'll leave that to you, Ben, what you were gonna say about it.
I just have so much to say. First of all, you're the first American that I've ever met that proposes relaxed performances instead of sensory friendly performances, which I've been trying to talk to every theater company possible about this. It's huge in London, and I'm trying to slowly but surely through my activism go into a more opt-in model, because when you have a sensory friendly performance, you're giving someone half the art. You know, if a lighting designer spent a week crafting a specific lighting moment, and then we invite a whole bunch of people with disabilities in, and then we take that moment and only give them half of it, that to me always rubbed me the wrong way. So I like got a tear in my eye when I was like, an ally for an opt-in relaxed performance model. I've never met someone from America who does that, only in London. So thank you. That's why I was applauding.
We can talk so much more, Ben. We can talk so much more about this. That's great.
Absolutely.
And well, the thing also that I want to mention is with ours, we say like relaxed can encompass sensory friendly. So relaxed for us is a larger banner. And, you know, sometimes I know DC is very anchored in sensory friendly because that's what took root for them first. And that's okay. And to them, they expand that meaning. So they use that term, but it actually means, when we were aligning our organizations, we were realizing, okay, it actually means a lot of what we're saying in relaxed, but with relaxed, for us, it gets to be a bit more encompassing. That's how we're approaching it. And I also do want to just put a disclaimer out there for folks who might be hearing this term for the first time, a relaxed performance, that I've had a patron from another theater that I didn't know, but they took offense to the term relaxed because they're like, whoa, you're telling me to relax? And it's like, no, actually, no. We're saying as a culture, as a theater, as a community, we are relaxing and suspending traditional, or find a better word, theater going etiquette. It's about us needing to relax. And this is us saying, hey, the space is yours. I know it's usually da-da-da-da-da-da. This space is yours. So that's how we kind of came to the terminology. And our first performance was a sensory friendly performance. And then we kept our learning journey continued, and we transitioned to a relaxed performance. And there's a cohort of theaters that we work with, People's Light, Theater Horizon, Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival, McCarter Theater Center, Delaware Theater Company, and Montgomery Theater. We all collaboratively came to what our working model was going to be. What are the things we agree to as a collective, so we could help build an audience for that work. And people would, when they came to our organizations, there was a shared brand. They knew, oh, it's going to be like this, instead of it could mean anything. So we all agreed to relaxed performance as a group when we were doing that work together.
Did you have more to say, Ben?
Yeah, I also, when it comes to the question that you expertly brought up about, family-friendly shows versus doing the Pillow Man, we have, I think, in America, this like need and desire to curate the emotions of people with disabilities, where, growing up in the autism community, if someone is sad, we don't say, well, why are you sad? We go, no, sad is not a good emotion. You should work to be happy. And so in doing so, we are somewhat limiting the feelings that we let those, especially with cognitive disabilities, experience. And so I think it's so important to create an environment where we are giving everyone the entire swath of emotions within the theater. I also want to say, I think a thing that we do sometimes is we have this idea that, like, if you can't do everything, then you should probably do nothing, which I totally get it. A theater cannot change their seating for $10 million. I'm an artistic director. If you ask me to put $2,000 to something, I'm like, ooh. But I think very rare, like, there's a theater in town here that wants to be accessible, but they're built in a place with stairs, just stairs. Everywhere you look, there's a stair. And one thing I've been talking to them about is, like, great, you're not in a place where you can accommodate those in wheelchairs. That doesn't mean you can't accommodate folks who are blind, folks who have autism, all of these different things. And most of the time, as a disabled man, I'm aware I have a disability. This is not news to me. And I'm the expert of my own body. I'm the expert of my own mind. We provide sensory friendly headphones at every performance. No one ever takes them, because if you're someone that needs headphones, you bring your own. What I think the accessibility key part is, one of you brought it up. I'm so sorry. Is creating that welcoming environment, that disability is not only allowed and respected here, but it's actually welcomed. Your experience as a disabled person is invigorating the theater that we're doing. And that can be as simple as putting an accessibility table with a bunch of fidgets in a prominent space in the lobby. Just says to people, even if you're not someone that uses fidgets, just says to someone, oh, in this space, I'm not only welcome, I am brought in with gusto. You actually want me here. And I think for the longest time, there's a wonderful actress named Jess Tom out of London who has Tourette's. If you know Jess Tom, you know Jess Tom. Who she would say, well, I have Tourette's, and she'd go to the theater. They'd all go, please come in, please come in, please come in. We really want you here. She'd sit in the audience, she'd have a tick, and the entire audience would, like, on her. And she's like, this isn't accessible. You could do anything right now. You could give me any accommodation. The fact that people are staring at me is not accessible. So creating an accessible space doesn't actually, for me, mean the physical stuff, because all my folks, all my audience members, they're the experts. They're the ones that know, no, what I need my headphones, or I need to sit here. What creating accessible spaces to me is creating a space where people can advocate for their needs and don't feel like there's anything wrong with them advocating for those needs. That, which sounds so simple, and yet
It's
is,
so
I think,
hard.
the most important part.
I think that's the hardest thing about the hardest thing in the disabled community is, and as a disabled person too, is learning to be your own best advocate, and helping support other people to be their own best advocate. And then, for, like, we talk about it a lot in the medical system, how can doctors and hospitals help disabled people feel supported in being an advocate for themselves, and listened to and welcomed. It's the same as what you're talking about in the arts. They are welcomed to say, this is my need, and not have it turned away. Going off of that, something we had talked about, the host and I had talked about, because I was asking them, what keeps you from the theater? And I've asked other people, what keeps you from the theater now, like now that you are disabled? A lot of us are on disability. and there's a lot of people that are extremely low income. Um, uh, and there's programs out there for students, there's things like that, but I haven't yet seen, and I could be completely wrong, I have not seen programs for people that are low income. Like if you have EBT, because I mean, I would love to say if you have disability, but there's other people, like there's people that, could be on welfare, homeless, and if you're telling the community stories, I feel like the community deserves the opportunity to be there to hear them too, you know. So when we're telling stories about people going, yes, Philip.
No,
Oh,
no, no.
I thought so it's I think it would be wonderful to have opportunities to offer performances to people that are like on, food stamps, EBT, or some kind of proof of I am this. And how can theaters get funding to support causes like that? I guess that's my big
Yeah.
question.
And I think it's a great question. And even considering like the cost of some of this work, some of what this work costs is the inventory, us making seats available, which, isn't a direct cost, but it might be the possibility of lost revenue perhaps. But if we're not filling every single seat every single night, we probably do have some capacity that can be, extended and allowed, which is not coming at an expense to us really. But there's a program that we're very fortunate to be a part of. The organization in Philadelphia is called ArtReach, and ArtReach has introduced, it's a $2 ticket. It started out as a museum pass, and then we were able to expand it to performing arts, where if someone there's a particular access card, they're an access card holder in the state of Pennsylvania, and that can be with regards to disability or financial need. And if someone has this card, then they get access to a $2 ticket. And so ArtReach puts out the message to the different
That's great.
organizations. I mean, for us, like we wouldn't be able to institute a program like that as our own theater. That would be very hard for us. Okay, well, we don't want to get into someone's medical background. I don't need you to show me your doctor's note, anything like that. So it's great that we have this intermediary that they know, okay, access card holder means, and then we're able to extend that access. And there are a lot of theaters in town, a lot of organizations that use this program that are a part of it. And the initial pushback is always like, oh my goodness, we're giving away tickets for $2. And most of these theaters are not filled all of the time. You do have capacity. And, you could even have an invited dress rehearsal where you specifically say, please come in. This is, free. There's, we're experimenting with pay what you decide for certain performances, where we might say the suggested amount is $25, and you can pay it forward and pay for someone else's ticket. That's however much, maybe we say it's like $40 or $50 to pay it forward, or you could volunteer for your ticket. Contact us at this address and you can volunteer, you can usher, you can do whatever, volunteer, and then you're not paying anything, or you can pay what you decide. And that's, we're experimenting with that, but that's been, because the question is always how you're valuing that ticket, and are you then undervalued and all, but it's like here, the perceived value remains. And how are we just making that more available to folks? But I'm really appreciative for the partnership of ArtReach in Philadelphia that helped to do all that research, get all these things going, and they hold the connections. They're like they share the information with various networks to let them know about this discount and what shows are happening, so that we are not constantly promoting $2 discount to everybody. So we're, getting other audience members potentially upset, or I don't know what, but it's helpful that we're not confusing our message, and that we're able to say to folks, yes, we have this program available, and direct people there. But ArtReach has the connection with all of these arts organizations so that people can curate their own season of work, basically, and be able to go anywhere that they want.
We have
incredible.
We have a similar program called Inclusive Hospitality that we don't have a fantastic program like ArtReach, where for us it's a $1 ticket 2 hours before the production you can get. And we reserve 20 tickets twice a week. And if someone comes to us and says, I need inclusive hospitality, and we have a seat and it's not an inclusive hospitality night, we always sell those tickets. It's a $1 ticket. We think it is very important to not make it a charity base where it's like, oh, here's a free ticket, because a lot of these folks, they want to pay for theater, they just don't have the funds. And I always stand out there, and I always keep a stack of $1 in my pocket. And if someone like they know if I don't have $1, I can go to Ben, who's standing there, and Ben will hand me $1. Ben, the person, not Ben, the artistic director, and do so. And I think it's so important. And like for us, we don't have a way to what's the word? To check if someone actually needs this. And I mean, the way I look at it is like, if someone is going to all the trouble to get a $1 ticket and they are showing up 2 hours before, then I'll give them a $1 ticket. And if they don't need that and they're taking advantage of the system, then okay, that's
Right.
fine. You know, great.
Right.
We have contributed. And what a lot of people say, what I say when people go like, but all that lost revenue. And I'm like, is it? If someone is going to that lengths to buy a $1 ticket, are they ever going to buy the $40 ticket? Probably not. It's either they've got this program or they don't have anything. And so for us, that's vital we want people to see. Now, mind you, we also work in Denver. No one has a black box. I'm from Chicago theater. I want a black box. No one has it. It's all 500 seat houses that we always have tickets available. So there's always inventory. Like very rarely has there been a time where we've like, this production is 100% sold out, no questions asked, no anything. So that also makes that conversation a little bit easier. But yeah, I think when we talk about accessibility, it's not just about disability, it's about everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
And
it's attacking really the economic accessibility.
That's
really
right. Yes.
is about I mean, it's always been something that's been talked about in theaters, right? How do we, whether you're talking about cultivating younger people who are, you know, usually more economically challenged when it comes to theater pricing, or anyone who isn't, you know, in our very classist society, someone who doesn't have the economic wherewithal to pay the ticket pricing, which is now at, you know, kind of average. I'm old enough to remember when the prices I'm charging now in my little 94 seat theater were unheard of on Broadway. I mean, I saw my first Broadway show for under $10 in the 8th row in the orchestra. So, you know,
Must be nice.
You know, it's I mean, that's just a piece I carry throughout all of this accessibility discussion. And I'm thrilled, and I'm very envious that you all have some of these things that you can lean on, if you will, to make those decisions for you, right? To say, oh, this program exists, all I have to do is say yes, I'll do that. And you've taken the middlemen out. We've got nothing like that here.
I wonder if there's like a social
now I know what to lobby for, Marcy.
Yeah. And you know, and it may not be like an arts and culture partner. It might be more of like a social service partner that has a way of vetting this information. And then you just say, great, let your people know. And you know, you can let your patrons and stakeholders know too. But it's the vetting part of like, I didn't want to have to decide what the barrier, what's the thing, the hurdle, right, to say you're eligible for this. But also, as Ben was saying, you don't even implement any kind of barrier. You just say, if you need this, here's what's available to you. So you don't have to have necessarily the middleman on that front. I'm just appreciative that there was a structure that we were a part of that we could benefit from, but doesn't necessarily have to be. Yeah.
It helps to advertise it too, because for those of us that aren't, like, I'm fortunate enough to still have friends in the theater community that are telling me, oh, there's this IDR this night, or they're, you know, invited dress rehearsal for those of you listening. But I can't always physically, because of my medical condition, I'll be like, yes, I'm going to come to that one. And then on that particular night, I can't. My body just won't let me. So, you know, that is a frustration. So to have like multiple options like that, and to have like that's just incredible that exists.
one of the things I will say that was a learning, God, I hate that word. That was a lesson that we learned during the pandemic, of course, is being far more lenient, which would be the old world, about people's not feeling well, people getting sick, people telling us they simply can't make it. And one of the barriers we did remove then, and we've just kept it, is there's no fees for any of that. You can do it post the show, you can do it whenever. Oh, I missed it the other night, I wasn't feeling well, can I apply that ticket to another show? Of course, based on availability, right? And to y'all's point, even at 94 seats, there's usually a seat or two for most shows that of course you can come in, because I can't, to Christina's point, I can't, only she knows when she is feeling well enough to come to see a show, right? So I can't judge that. I can't be in the room to do that. So it is.
But it also makes sense, I think, for the company to not feel that loss as well, to do what you're doing and make that ticket applicable to another show, like you said, or like even later in the season. Like it's a credit to something else.
Yeah.
It's not a loss for the theater or for the patron. Yeah.
We have a. Oh, I'm sorry, Philip.
No, I mean, the point in all that is I think you do have to release, as a producer, maybe, of theater, you have to release your stranglehold a little bit on your revenue and just go, that's okay. That's okay, because it does come back to you at some point down the road. Kindness always comes back to you somewhere down the road. I live my life like that. So,
and treating people like people. So that's
yes. Yeah.
That's all anybody wants. Yeah. Sorry, Ben.
No worries. I'm autistic, so I constantly interrupting. It's not on purpose. Like that's my main accommodation need, is like I'll jump in and then realize, oh, you're still talking, I'm so sorry. That's my main accommodation need in life. I should have mentioned that.
It's all good.
We have a program called Disability Days, which is if you call us 2 minutes for the production or 2 minutes after the production or the next day, and you say, hey, I have a ticket tonight, but I'm having a disability day, that to us signals, great, you can't attend tonight's performance. And like Philip said, if there is inventory, which there usually is, we'll find another time, or you can just show up and we keep track and it says, oh, blah, blah, blah had a disability day. And what I like about that is it takes the onus away from the patron to have to explain and have to worry about, people will come, and we know having debilitating migraines is a disability. Not every theater company accepts that. Some people go, well, person up. And that's not the way we look at it. And a lot of our patrons might be embarrassed. They're like, God, I've been looking forward to this for months because this is the one place I go because of my disability. And now I can't come on this day. But if I call them, and so it just takes the onus off it. If you just say the words disability day to us, we go, fantastic. And that disability day can be anything from my joints aren't moving today, all the way to I'm feeling a little sad tonight and a little depressed, and I feel like I really need to stay home tonight. And we don't ask, we don't need to know.
That's great. I wanted to, if everyone's okay with this, I wanted to move forward to the topic of representation in the arts. Specifically towards disability, but I think it's going to cover like inclusivity in general. But there's a lot of, and I think I wrote this all to you, there's a lot of performers coming out talking about their disabilities to the public, which is wonderful. It's bringing education and awareness. It's also bringing a lot of debate. And one thing the host and I had talked about was it also brings pressure too, because when you see somebody at this level, you feel a pressure, oh, I'm not able to do those things. But I think the biggest thing we take away from it is the education and the ability to bring awareness. But I'd love to know your perspectives, because this is like becoming a taboo topic. Does a character that has a disability have to be played by somebody with a disability? Because the Artie from Glee had come out and said that if he'd known now what he knew, if he knew then when he was offered the part, what he knew now about disability and what was right or not right to do, he wouldn't have taken the part, because he felt like the part should have been to somebody who was in an actual wheelchair. So what do you guys think about that?
I
I
have
know that's a loaded question.
that I'm
Yeah.
happy to give, but if other people want to go first, that's fine before we get to my controversy.
I'll jump in simply because this is something our theater has been wrestling with forever, not particularly when it comes to disability necessarily. But if you go to the analogy that says, does every queer character in a show need to be played by a queer actor? Does everyone need to be played by someone who gender represents that way in real life? So we deal with that all the time, and that some of it is, I think, to that actor in Glee's point, if you're robbing someone of an opportunity, then I think you need to step away. But we were doing a play called Corpus Christi, which is a little controversial play, but it reimagines the Christ story in 1950s Texas, and Jesus and Judas are lovers, and which is actually a really interesting take on the betrayal, etc. But the actor we were going to cast in the role of Jesus, known as Joshua in the play, wrote us a lengthy email saying, you know what, I'm not queer, I'm an ally, I'm in this 100%, and I'm thrilled that you think I'm capable of representing this role well, but I need to let you know that I am very willing to step aside should there be someone who should have the role instead of me. That email told me, you're exactly the person I want to have in this role. Because you are open enough to, number one, best actor in the group, but also open enough to learn and go. But on the flip side, of course, the advantage in the queer community is we've been playing straight people forever, right? Which is not going to be the case for most performers with disabilities. So that is the flip that we've got that other people don't. So it also muddies the water. But I don't know. That's where I am. It's really thorny. It's very, 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 very thorny. The one place we're really tight about it now, again, because it's about people who've not had opportunity, is when we're dealing with roles that are specifically for trans performers. We will make sure that we have, and again, it's being prepared, right? Which the two of you do every day for your audiences, but in terms of artists, is being prepared to say, well, we're going to have to go out of town to cast that. We will have to bring in other resources to make sure this is done appropriately, or else we can't do it and do it authentically. So, Ben, you.
So I live in a very interesting space in two realms that I'm still trying to work out this question. 95% of the time, the answer is, of course, for me. And it can be a challenge. I just did a show that I shall not name, where we featured an actor in a wheelchair, and I brought that actor in a wheelchair, and this person's disability was not palatable by society standards. They spoke with a halted speech, which freaked people out, as well as were in a wheelchair. And like, they were incredible. They're probably going to win every single award from, like, this is a critically lauded production. And trying to fight this artistic director, who I have deep affection for, and show, hey, you need to remove the preconceived notions that you have, that just because this person does not sound like you doesn't mean their intellect is any less, or they're any less incredible. And like, they stole the show. It was stupid how the show was stolen by them. So in that case, it's like, yes, of course, and we need much more representation. On the other hand, I have a brother named Adam, who has high impact autism, what I call like autism with a capital A. He's nonverbal. He is intensely not able to advocate for himself. And there are times when I get frustrated within the disabled theater community that, like, if you are not able to advocate for yourself, then it's like you don't exist. It's this like very much internalized ableism within our community that is very frustrating to me. And so there are moments, and I have done this, when I have cast a non-disabled actor to play a role such as my brother, because as not a this is the best person for the role, but as an accessibility tool. Adam cannot tell his own story, so I'm going to cast this other actor to speak the story that Adam can tell. This is a move that is not widely loved by a lot of my colleagues within the disability movement. Like, they understand the impetus for it, but it's still frustrating. And so it's a complicated topic for me. I think 95%, especially working in family where a lot of disabled actors have migrated, because there's two companies here. There's Family and Magic Moments. And so they're like, oh, if I want to be a professional actor with a disability where I'm not just like a hot commodity, everyone's staring at me, I moved to Denver because that's where the work is. And like, that's the place where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in a chair, but everyone's in a chair. Fantastic. So like, yes, most plays that I read that are disability and people go, how do we cast it? How do we cast it? I'm like, bring someone in from Denver. I have 6 actors for you to take a look at. That being said, there are very few moments where I do think it is important that from a representational aspect, we cast a non-disabled actor as an accessibility tool. Now, obviously, Artie in Glee absolutely should have been played by a disabled actor, like, no question. But there's a wonderful play called Falling by Deanna Gent that's one of my favorite plays ever written, because it's a selfish reason. It's like my story, like, where I was like, oh, Deanna Gent, you just wrote my story. I didn't know we had met. Fantastic. But that's a play where, yeah, I had to cast somebody with a non-disability because otherwise we weren't going to do the play, and that play is too important to tell, to not be shown.
One of the things, sorry, I just want to follow up on something you said too. I do believe, because you talked about how do you best tell the story and how do you best get that message across. I also think you take your audience into consideration when you do that. And again, this doesn't relate to the disability community, but in my world, about half my audience would self-identify as not queer, right? So my responsibility as a producer says, what stories do they need to hear that advocate for me and the community I represent? And how do I best tell that so they get it? And I just sort of wanted to amplify that piece of what you said, because I do think that the voice is an awful word to use in this case, but that transaction of telling the story from the artist to the, making that connection with the audience member and making sure that story is told and heard and understood is when we complete the circle of what we do in our space. So
It's critical. Yeah. And I think that speaks to kind of what both of you are saying. I'm in a weird space myself, Ben, because like I started acting when I was 10, 11 in local theater in town. And and then ended up going to a conservatory and being an actress and a teaching artist. So for me, I've always come from it from the perspective of it's the best person from the role. It's the best person to tell the story. What does that mean? I think it depends on like we have said, every disability is different. And every case of every disability is different. So like with your brother, he really needs someone to be that voice for him, to share his story. I was looking for a better word, and like I would need that too. I've had people ask, could you do a reading? Could you do this? I'm like, it would be completely irresponsible of me to sign on for that, because like with my migraines, I get paralyzed on the right side of my body. So I would just like go completely out. I start slurring my words, and I've been paralyzed for up to a week with it. So and just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean like that encompasses so many things. So there's people that are in wheelchairs that are like the actress on Broadway who are fully capable of doing a Broadway show, which for those that are not in the theater world, that is intense. Like, all those shows a week, the rehearsals, and and I know like your actors like Ben that are experiencing this with rehearsals and shows, like being a performer is a physically, it is an active job. So it depends on, I think it depends on what the disability role is too. Like, and if you have that act, I would never be offended if someone was playing one of my disabilities or somebody else's that I think but that's me. I think the important thing, because I am like, oh, well, the actor and the team are learning about this and they're using this as a vehicle to get the story out and educate the community, educate the world about our experience, about my experience. And that means so much to me since I can't do it for myself. But I do believe it is vital to have a representative with that. Just like those people need to do actual research, not just read a book, not just like they need to be talking and spending time with people with those disabilities, their families, their loved ones, their friends, like immerse themselves in that situation and see what it really is so they can be that best vehicle.
Right.
Yeah, I just
And
want to
I
jump.
Go, please.
Well, I was just thinking, the other side of it though is and something that I've seen when folks are performing perhaps like a character, portraying a character with autism, I have seen folks put on the performance. There's a performative element of like, oh, this is what we as a culture come to understand about autism. So I'm performing in this way that becomes very affected because I'm meant to communicate that. Whereas opposed to if you have an artist with autism, it can manifest in any number of ways. And, and so there's, I'm also very mindful of what are the opportunities that we are affording actors of all ability, disability, neurodivergence. What are the opportunities that we're opening so that it isn't just when we have a role where it does specify disability or where it does specify neurodivergence, that those are the opportunities. But to your point, Phil, initially about, within the queer community that folks are playing everything, but also as a field, we haven't been doing that. We haven't been giving as many opportunities. And something that I found that was really fascinating to me is that as we began to expand our inclusive welcome with the accommodations we were making, and really elevating the priority of folks with disabilities and neurodivergent individuals, we did put out a specific casting call for an actor with either intellectual disabilities or with autism for a particular production. And all of these artists who I'd already worked with, I've already hired them. They've been involved in different things. Like, hey, by the way, I'm neurodiverse and I have autism and I have Asperger, and here's my thing. And like, folks were like, it became a safe space. And like, I don't think those folks would have wanted to share that. And that's something else, just a lesson in learning for our field, is the stigmatizing of disability, and that so many people don't want to share that. And as an employer, I cannot ask someone that. I can't ask them like, you need to self-identify, like, but we can put it as an opt-in model. We're letting people disclose to us and welcoming that in, but we can't force someone to tell us that information. And the same with, how someone racially identifies, or, their gender, sexuality. We can put out the invitation, but we can't force someone to share that. So it is creating the conditions where people feel safe and comfortable, and like they want to put that out there. And then we as a field need to make sure that we are not stigmatizing their disability and suddenly, oh, well, that person has whatever is going on, so that means they're in this box. It's how do we continue to provide those opportunities. And I also think a whole other tangent on training, right? So we're saying who's the best person for the role, but also who's had the access to these training programs. Oftentimes it's, prioritizing neurotypical and non-disabled individuals. It's prioritizing because, institutions haven't figured out how best to support folks. And they might say, yes, everyone's welcome, in the same way that as a theater, we say everyone's welcome, but how are we manifesting that? And how are we making sure that our programs really do support folks of a whole range of needs? So I'd say with like, who's the best person for the role kind of thing, we may not have had all of that training available to folks in an equitable way, for the benefit of the field. Christina, you want to jump in?
Well, yes. I'm like trying to put a thought on it. I think we also have to be careful in how we do those approaches in the separation. Like that also needs to be inclusive and not exploitative, because and we talk about that in a lot in like the children, the theater for youth world, about like the performance of children and how are we using the kids in an exploitative manner. And there are a lot of programs out there for children with disabilities, things like that. But like to learn how to perform. But and this will get me in hot water too, because it's such a controversial topic, because there's the world that, a lot of it though is the parents want the kid to see, they want to see the kid on the stage. And also that's how you get the money. If you see, hey, I worked with this group of kids that have these issues, and then, wow, this is what we did. That's how we, you get the grants and things like that. But then you're not allowing them to be quote unquote messy. You're not doing what's best for them. You're kind of dumbing it down, if that makes sense. And I think it really needs to, they need to also be allowed to be inclusive with kids without disabilities. And this training needs to go throughout, like where we were, like, and I was feeling stuff then, but I was not like, I could go up and down crazy stairways and things like that. But, do you want to jump in, Ben? I feel like I'm totally been interrupting you and my brain's going in circles right now.
Not at all. It's just a tricky, like, I think Philip, you mentioned it, where it was like, yeah, you want to cast the best role for the part. What I am saying is 99.9%, that best person for the part is the person with the lived experience. There just has to be, like everything, when we put a fast and hard rule down, that's when our theater gets in trouble. Like we have a it's so funny, we talk about relaxed performances as a model. We're like, the number one rule that we say in theater is you can't have your cell phones, right? Like that's like if someone has their cell phone and it rings, it's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And I always wonder why. Like if I'm with all my lovely friends here at Starbucks, we'll hear 50 cell phones ring. And we're able to ignore that because humans have selective attention. We can say, I'm going to focus on X. It's usually not the fact that someone's cell phone has rung that's distracting us. It's not the cell phone. It's the fact that someone would have the audacity to not turn their cell phone on. And this is a hard and fast rule that we have created that like, yes, what I need to do is I need to look around with an angry face to shame the person who forgot. And when we get into hard and fast rules, that's when we create a separation. And like, yeah, if it's your first time going to the theater and your cell phone rang and you were horribly embarrassed and people shushed you and looked at you, why would you ever come back and spend your $40 that you worked so hard at? It's the same sort of thing. We need to stop with this model of intense rules that have no kind of flexibility within them because we're living in a flexible world right now. That's what 2020,
People are
1980,
Well-
1970, there wasn't an opportunity to be flexible because we didn't have things like cell phones, the internet. We didn't have, you'd buy your season package 6 months in advance, you'd put those dates and that's what you would do. We live in a different world right now. And so I think it's not about necessarily should somebody do one thing, should somebody do another thing. I think it's more about examining each individual case and saying, I believe in nothing about us without us 99.9% of the time.
If I can amplify, sorry.
Finish. And then a lot of people come to me and when I say this, then they go, well, why can't you have an actor with a lower impact of autism play that role? And for me, once again, that goes back to kind of the first point I made on this podcast of like, we need to stop homogenizing disability. Just because someone has autism, if you have a lower impact version of autism, that's nothing like someone with a higher impact version of autism. To me, that's the exact same thing as having a non-disabled actor play the role. If you don't have that, you either have the lived experience or you don't. You don't sort of have the lived experience, is my view. Sorry, Philip, please.
No, I just wanted to amplify exactly that point that you made. Lived experience, we talk about it in terms of using authenticity of voice. And in my community, yes, if you've lived all your life as a straight person and you're playing a gay character, and you're a great actor, could you probably pull it off? Sure. But what you don't bring to it is exactly what you said, Ben, that lived experience, which simply gives you the ability as a performer to take all the shorthand you need to communicate that with the audience, one hopes. And I think that authenticity, voice, presentation, all of that becomes really important. So I agree with you 100%.
I'm going to throw this out at all three of you because I think I'm finding it really interesting. I think I'm the controversial one here. If we're saying that it's important, the lived experience is what it's important. I absolutely agree that in the script, like in the team, but in the performer, to me, it's acting. Like if the character is a homeless person, would you always cast a homeless person? If they've been, a army vet and went to Vietnam, would you cast that person? And I think we walk down a dangerous road when we start separating all of the, like saying, no, but for these particular experiences, they're more important and we can't they have to be done by somebody within that community with that specific experience.
Mhm.
I sort of call bullshit on that. Like,
Go
with
for it. Call bullshit.
respectfully, I call bullshit on that, because that's the excuse that we've used, right? Like, that's the excuse that we have used for the longest time to exclude people. Like, that's, to me, like, I hear the thing of like, yes, but by definition, an actor is playing someone else on stage. That
Yeah.
being said, that's the exact excuse that we have had an all-white production of The Mountaintop in
Well, that's not what, those
not
are
20
two
years
different
ago.
things.
But why?
Because what I'm saying is, I think we need to absolutely open up auditions, shows. Like, it should be colorblind, it should be gender blind, like it should be like every, like disability, like able blind, everything should be. But if, and we should, I think rehearsals should be accessible, production should be like, I want, this is my dream, and the dream that, you know, but I also still believe when it comes down to it, it's the right person for the role, whoever is best, the best vehicle for. I think we also limit the portrayal if we say it can only be that community. Does that make sense?
But in my view, we have, with that viewpoint of it's the best person for the role, that has limited the training and the opportunity of the people with disabilities to never be the right person in the role. They're never
Yes.
going to be the right person in the role because we keep not giving them roles because we're passing them up for the able-bodied people. And I don't think it's a difference between race and disability.
Right.
I
I do
don't
think it's a
I don't-
difference in disability experiences. Like, I'm also thinking of, like, I'm selfishly thinking of my own experience in that, like, I know I could never portray my own disability on stage because I physically couldn't manage it. And there is a pressure out there when we talk about it has to be done by the people in the community, that, like, I would love to have an able-bodied person tell this story because I think it's an important story that I physically could not do. Does that make
Right.
sense?
I
And I
think
think
it
there are
does.
other disabilities out there that they, and I have had the training, but like, my disability has been a progressive disability.
Right.
Um,
I'm just saying, and like that goes to my point of it's a case by case basis, but
yes.
to use that argument of, well, what's the point of an actor if they can't portray any sort of role? For me, like, what we have is 500 years of history that tells us artistic directors will never cast Tiresias as a blind person, that will constantly be putting someone in a disability. If we don't advocate for that, it's not going to happen. It's not. If the disability community, if all the disability advocates, me, Reagan, Claudia, Ryan, Allie, we all came out and we were like, you know what? We actually made a mistake. Please feel free to cast whoever you want in any disabled role. Theaters would go, oh, thank God. And they would cast all non-disabled actors. That's what would happen. And the one time they did cast a non-disabled actor, it would be used as a prop for the theater. It would be, oh, look how fantastic we are that we're casting a non-disabled actor. So I think it's just a very slippery slope to use that argument of, oh, any actor can play any role because that's the definition of acting. That will exclude people. We have years and years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years telling us that's exactly what will happen, in the same way as everything, you know. And
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's how we need to change the language too. And maybe I'm using poor language because I think it works both ways. I think just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean you have to play a disabled character. And like when you're talking about the prop aspect, that's also what I'm talking about with exploitative. Like, I think there's lots of people with disabilities that don't want to be used as a prop.
Absolutely. And when it becomes our, I'm sorry, I'm bogarting the conversation. When it becomes acceptable in the world to cast an actor who is in a chair or who is deaf or who is blind in a non-disabled role, then maybe we can open this conversation up again. But it's not. If we look at what just happened at the Public, Monique and Reagan were cast, not Reagan, Monique and Allie were cast specifically to be disabled characters because they wanted Denai Guerra, who is not disabled, to play Richard. So it was sort of an apology tour, in my view. If we look at all of these characters, it is not a thing where we are casting non-disabled or disabled folks to play non-disabled roles. That's literally not happening. So until that happens, I don't think we can even use that argument. Sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
No, please don't.
No, I love what you said.
Keep your mic live. Be real close. And I think it's about consciousness. And I know, Christine, you mentioned folks are talking about like colorblind, casting or disability kind of blind, and the idea of being conscious, that it's like color conscious casting or disability conscious casting, I think is a helpful place to be in understanding what are the implications of that disability. What does it mean? What does it say? And so how we're being mindful of what that is. And, I think a company like Family Theater that is entirely dedicated to representation, this is the world of the theater that you are bringing and helping others see and understand. You get more leeway, I believe, in being able to say, well, all of these actors are portraying all of these different roles in these different ways. And so when you do want to make an intentional choice, for example, the reference to your brother of like not portraying that role with this person, that is coming out of a deep level of thought and care and intentionality that is not what we're talking about when we say, Artie and that particular role. That was like they're not doing the work, and they're not investing in disabled and neurotypical neurodiverse individuals in their casting and hiring processes. So I think it's it's like the field is continuing to grow and evolve, but I think that should always be the priority. And I think about I have a whole other tangent that we can go on that I don't think is probably for this conversation, but just thinking about the notion of the performative nature of disability and how problematic that is and has become.
Yes.
Because there are these ideas, but it's showing me that you understand the disability instead of having it be an embodied experience. And that's such a loss for the field and for audiences and for those individuals with those lived experiences who've been pushed out of opportunities. So that's just adding.
A positive thing I saw just to this discussion about opening up roles to people you might not normally consider. I saw the tour of To Kill a Mockingbird a few months ago, where they used a signing actor who could speak and sign, but mostly was more, clearly more comfortable in communicating with sign. But the way they integrated that into the production made it totally organic in that play at that time. Whereas you realized at that time, someone with that disability would not have that position in the community, would not be, doing et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in that world they created, it was totally organic. To the point where I literally looked up the actor. I Googled the actor when I got home to look at their credentials. And there was massive credentials with, not gonna remember the name of the theater, the theater that uses the Deaf West, is it Deaf West Theater?
Yeah.
That uses those actors, and I had a moment as someone who does this, who goes, well, no, that's how you do that, and make it work. It was just, it was gorgeous. It was just gorgeous, beautiful, and the production did not focus on that one bit. There was not a bit of press about it. There is not a bit of, as you said, no performative stuff about, look what we did, we're so great. The tour was all being performative about the fact that a minor role was being played by the same woman who played Scout 60 years ago in the movie. You know, that's all they were talking about. So it's fascinating. Sorry.
No.
Tangential,
don't be.
as Marcy would say. But
No, I think this is great. It also opens me up to the question that I kind of talked about like the ideal of, but how many of you, and I know Ben, you have talked to this, but feel free to jump in as well, have had an actor with some form of disability in a show, where they and how has your, I guess, theater worked with accommodations for performers? You know, because I think that, you know, we talk about accommodations for audience members, but how have you worked with making accommodations for performers through the audition process, rehearsal process, and production process?
Yeah, it's a great question. Usually when people are talking about relaxed or sensory friendly or ASL interpreted performances or open caption performances, they're like, how do you find your audience? And what are we doing? How do we grow what we're doing? And my first question is always like, well, what's the work that's happening on stage? Whose story are you telling? And who's telling that story? You know, and who's on your staff? Who's part of your board? So are we representative of our community and of individuals with disabilities that, you know, reflect our broader our broader region and community? Are those folks part of our organization already? And if not, why not? And if so, how are we listening to those individuals, elevating those individuals? How are we making intentional space as a staff, as a board, with our artistic hiring practices? Because, you know, all of these considerations, and Ben has mentioned this too, that, you know, you need to co-create. You're coming up with these solutions with the individuals who are sharing, here's what I need. So, you know, you are being reactive in understanding what someone's needs are, but then I would say you become proactive for the next person. So you have that information come in, you learn what's an accommodation, what might be needed, what you don't know, and then you're better prepared going forward. But I think it's that we need to be positioning ourselves as arts producers, as continual learners in this, as eager learners, but able to be co-creating the solutions and the offerings that we want to have. So making sure that door is open, making sure we are being proactive in our ask, in saying, hey, please, like, let us know, here are some things. And I think they're indicators. So even as was mentioned before, like having the fidgets in the lobby, nobody might use them, but it sends a message and it lets people know, oh, this is a place that might be receptive, that might, you know, it sends a message. So how can we be putting those messages out in the casting call, in the audition room, in our hiring practices, to let people know we understand, we're on the level. We might not know all of your world, but we are receptive to knowing. And these are some examples of how we're letting people know that, yes, you can have a genuine conversation with us about the needs that you might have. So there's kind of, I don't know, it's like coding in a way. You need to like put out these messages to let people know, okay, the coast is clear, you know what you're doing. One of my early lessons with the sensory friendly and relaxed performances, we would, I had experienced some other theaters that were putting out there, like, we are inclusive, we are sensory friendly as an organization, this huge banner, and like claiming that you're doing it. And the reality is, you know, that means so many different things in so many different contexts. So to just say that you're an inclusive theater can mean nothing. And that can be really, really problematic to folks who are looking for those accommodations. And they come and they go, oh, if you're just saying you're doing everything, yeah, I don't know if I even trust you or want to be around this space, because you don't know what you don't know. And that can be a big, big challenge and problem. So when we were beginning to promote the relaxed and sensory friendly performances, we would have, I was doing like testimonials with people who had experienced the show, and they're saying, oh, it was so good, and this was so great, blah, 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 all these lovely things. I was like, no, I need to hear, and people need to hear, what were your barriers what were your assumptions coming in? What did you think might be a problem, so that we can be letting other people know that that's their experience? Because you may have actors, artists, staff members, whatever, who are like, you know, yeah, it's lovely that you think you can accommodate people, but you probably can't accommodate me. You probably don't know how to navigate what it is that I'm bringing to the table. And so being transparent about some of those some of those assumptions and just the path of thought in it's not that everything's rosy and you know how to do everything. It's what is the process along the way for how we continue to open the organization and continue to meet people where they are, and allowing people to know that they are the other side of that, that it's like the organization is open, but we're inviting a particular perspective and lived experience to know how we need to grow.
Great. I wanted to check and see if anybody had any final things they wanted to say before we kind of end today's discussion. I know I said I wouldn't keep you 2 hours, but we just had such a great talk and I love it. So thank you.
I would just love to throw in there that I do think you can start at any place is worth starting. And, to say, oh, there's so much, so we can't do anything, as Ben, as you were mentioning, how that can become its own paralysis of just not acting because it's overwhelming. We can start anywhere. So just start somewhere, as an arts organization, as like practitioners, that would be my advice to the field is, call somebody, call another theater, go to an accommodated performance and get a sense of what that is to start learning. But there doesn't have to be a huge cost to a lot of these things. In having an open caption performance, we in Philadelphia many of us have invested in these very fancy LED screens, and we have this computer program that does all these things. It has failed so many times that we've just put the script on a computer in a Google Doc, put it up on a screen, and that was our open captioning, and it worked. It was much more reliable, and maybe it's not beautiful, but it worked, and that takes so little
Probably much easier on the eyes too, because LED is so problematic
right?
for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And it's
we throw ours on a PowerPoint and project.
Yeah.
So it's like these solutions are there and don't need to cost a fortune. There, people invested in $5,000 screens that you can just cobble this together, and it actually is serving the need, because when you go to the theater, it's not, oh, sorry, the screen's not working today, and that whole audience doesn't get to benefit from the show. This is a reliable solution. And even with relaxed and sensory friendly performances, they don't need to be hugely expensive. You do want to know some things. You want to have some research. You want to be working with members in the community. And when, I'm saying, my listening tour of members in the community, we need to be, are we providing them food, hospitality, compensation for their expertise? Because there are a lot of folks are asked a lot of things about their experience. Folks with disabilities are asked to do and weigh in and share a lot of things. And we have to be mindful of their expertise and compensating folks and providing for them when we're asking of their advice and expertise. So that's a thing to be really mindful of too, but it doesn't have to be expensive starting this work. It is, if you have inventory available, you can dedicate a performance to be relaxed and have that as an experiment. I'd say, go experience what a relaxed performance is, do your due diligence and your homework on what it is that that a relaxed performance might encompass for your organization. But it doesn't need to be such a daunting process to get started. So I'd say just start anywhere and begin with who are the people within your community for whom they're not going to theater and that it's a barrier, and learning why.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that's so eloquently put, Marcy. That would be my passing thought too. Find something you can do and say, great, I'm going to do this great. And if that means I'm going to get a $20 box of fidgets and I'm going to put them in a little bin on my bar, fantastic. Totally approved. And very, the sensory friendly, everyone's like, oh, you have to bring in if you want to do a sensory friendly performance, you have to redesign the show. No, every board has a master. You can just pull the master down. It takes 30 seconds to actually do the thing. The harder part is getting people to come to a show and kind of show that, yes, this inclusion actually matters to us. This isn't a stunt we're doing. And what's interesting is actually sometimes I found the less you publicize it, the more people will come. The more you put in papers, look at this thing we're doing. A lot of the times that's kind of the red flag of oh, I just want to go see a show. I don't want to be a poster child. So I'm not going to go to this. Which I have found is the best way. Sometimes press is not your friend because it puts people in a place they don't want to be put in which is as an example, or, you know, I've gone and I've done theater where I'm like, yes, I am here to be your example on your grant. That's why I've been brought to this space. Fantastic. I am much more, I think, than item B on your grant proposal about how you're doing EDI effectively. So just do something and don't make a big deal out of it, I think, is my final passing thought.
And I would just add to all of this is, and again, you just mentioned it, Ben, as we are all deep into our DEI work, right, is realize the breadth and depth of what that means, and use the big I inclusive in all of the things that we talk about, and make sure, you're not narrowing the lens to what grantors want to hear or the press may want to hear, to your point, but to sort of live that work authentically in everything that you do.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, listeners. Stay tuned for our personal story, another personal story with disability, coming up on the 30th. You can also learn more about Marcy, Ben, and Philip and their theater companies on our website, www.speakinginspoons.com. And thank you, and happy spoons.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.
Hi, this is Christina Brookman, your host for Speaking in Spoons. I just wanted to let you know that we'll be having a very special Spoony Sunday this Sunday to follow up with the co-host about this special episode of accessibility and representation in the arts. We're looking forward to follow up and share our thoughts and personal experiences with you. And again, thank you so much to Marcy, Ben, and Philip for sharing their experiences. Stay tuned and save your spoons.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.